Whenever you see those monthly unemployment numbers pop up on the news, what are you really looking at? It seems like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer is one of the great detective stories in modern economics. And like any good mystery, it all kicks off with one single crucial question.
Right, this is the question at the absolute heart of the mystery. Is unemployment just a personal choice? People deciding they'd rather have some leisure time than work at the going wage? Or is it a failure of the market itself, a system that just isn't creating enough jobs for everyone who wants one? Seriously, how you answer this shapes everything, from how governments should tackle a recession to how we even think about the economy.
For decades, the debate was basically split between two main suspects. On one side, you've got the classical view. They argue that markets are, for the most part, pretty efficient. In their story, unemployment is voluntary. The market is always finding its balance, its equilibrium. But then, on the other side, you have the Keynesian view. They argue that wages are sticky, meaning they don't fall easily even when tons of people are out of work. And that creates a situation where you have way more people wanting jobs than there are actual jobs available. That's a market in disequilibrium.
So you'd think economists could just look at the data and solve the case, right? Well, not so fast. It turns out they had a massive blind spot in their approach, and it made reading the evidence incredibly difficult.
Okay, so here's the big problem. It's kind of like a detective showing up to a crime scene and just deciding the butler did it without looking at a single piece of evidence. For a huge part of the 20th century, most economic models didn't test if the market was in equilibrium. They just assumed it was. And by doing that, they were basically locking themselves into one answer before the investigation had even started.
That one starting assumption created this huge puzzle when it came to the data. Think about it. When you look at the total number of people working in the country, what are you actually seeing? Are you seeing the number of people who want to work? That's what we call labor supply. Or are you seeing the number of jobs that companies are offering? That's labor demand. Or, and this is the key, if the market isn't in balance, are you just seeing whichever of those two numbers is smaller?
And the consequences of getting this wrong were, they were massive. If you assume the market is always in equilibrium, then a recession suddenly looks like millions of people all deciding at the same time that they'd rather take a long vacation. It's a faulty assumption that leads to a totally backwards understanding of the economy, and it can lead to prescribing all the wrong policy cures. This is a huge deal because it completely changes the conversation from people don't want to work to people can't find work. But then, a new investigator entered the scene with a breakthrough tool. In the late 1970s, an economist named Orley Ashenfelter came up with a game-changing approach that would finally help crack this case wide open.
It all came together in this one paper, published in the absolute top-tier economics journal, Econometrica. And listen, this wasn't just another academic article. This thing was so influential, so groundbreaking, that it won the prestigious Frisch Medal, which is basically like the Oscars for an economics paper.
So what was this brilliant new tool? Ashenfelter introduced something called the min condition. It's a simple but profound idea. Instead of assuming equilibrium, he just said, hey, what if the employment level we actually see is just the minimum of two things, the number of people who want to work and the number of jobs being offered? Think about it like this. If 100 people are lined up to buy the new hot video game, but the store only has 50 copies in stock, how many games get sold? 50, right? The number of sales is determined by the minimum of supply and demand.
And this chart makes the idea crystal clear. Let's say we're in a recession. The number of people who want a job, that's labor supply, is high. But companies are nervous, they aren't hiring, so labor demand is low. The employment number we actually end up seeing reported in the news is the lower of those two bars. It's constrained by demand. We are observing what economists call the short side of the market.
So what was the big deal with this min condition? Well, it did something truly revolutionary. It took this long-running, abstract, almost philosophical debate and turned it into a concrete question that you could actually go out and test with real-world data.
This was a massive conceptual shift. It was the economic equivalent of a detective saying, okay, let's stop assuming our main suspect is guilty and let's actually go look for some evidence. For the first time ever, the core assumption that markets always clear was itself put on trial.
And he built this really clever econometric framework to do it. So here's the basic idea. First, he created two separate models, one for labor supply and one for labor demand. Second, he applied his min condition, saying the number of people we see working is going to be the lower of those two numbers. And third, and this is the truly brilliant part, he let the data decide. He estimated both models at the same time, essentially asking the data, okay, tell me, which one is the limiting factor here? Is it a lack of willing workers or is it a lack of available jobs?
And the verdict from the data? It was pretty clear. Ashenfelter's analysis showed that the Keynesian view had real merit. Disequilibrium mattered. A lot. The story of the labor market just couldn't be fully explained by the old equilibrium models alone. There are absolutely times when people are unemployed for one simple reason. There aren't enough jobs to go around.
But the impact of this paper went way beyond just settling a debate about the labor market. It really helped kickstart a whole new era of empirical economics. And it all came from the power of asking the right question. This quote from our source material just sums it up perfectly. After Ashenfelter's paper, that once safe, comfy assumption that markets always clear was no longer this innocent little starting point. It became just another hypothesis that had to be tested, that had to be proven with evidence. The burden of proof had officially shifted.
And this new way of thinking started popping up everywhere. This idea of economic regimes, where an economy can be either supply-constrained or demand-constrained, was suddenly being applied to all sorts of markets, from credit to housing and beyond. It basically taught a whole generation of economists to look for the hidden constraints that are shaping the data we see every day.
You can really see the legacy in action right here. Ashenfelter's structural method, his approach of modeling the underlying economic forces, paved the way for a whole host of powerful new techniques. For instance, the famous generalized method of moments, which came out of this 1982 paper, gave economists even sharper tools to put their theories to the ultimate test against data.
But when you strip it all away, maybe the deepest contribution wasn't technical at all. Maybe it was philosophical. Ashenfelter showed that the powerful tools of econometrics weren't just for fine-tuning models in an ivory tower. They could be used as a detective's kit to investigate and even help solve some of the biggest, most foundational debates in all of macroeconomics.
So the big takeaway from this whole detective story is the incredible power of questioning what we all just take for granted. Ashenfelter taught economists to be investigators, to test their core assumptions instead of just accepting them as gospel. And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What widely held belief that we all accept today really ought to be put to the test?